Hi everyone, Zoetropik here. Today I'll be reviewing Quantum Break, a time travel themed action-adventure game built around a third-person shooter model. Released in 2016 by Remedy Entertainment and directed by Sam Lake of Max Payne and Alan Wake fame, this title features some interesting gameplay mechanics and a story that, true to its peculiar genre, loops back on itself in an enjoyable way. Sounds good? Then let's do this. In Quantum Break, you play primarily as Jack Joyce, long-estranged younger brother of world-class theoretical physicist William Joyce, whose joint discovery of chronon particles in 1997 eventually led to the design of technology capable of manipulating the so-called Meyer-Joyce field. And thanks to the wonders of modern miniaturization, a compact and fully portable time machine. Okay, so I might have lied about that last part. In an effort to avoid spoilers here, let's just say Will appears to suffer some sort of breakdown in 1999, and his promising academic career is derailed by what to the outside world manifests as a growing paranoia. This culminates in 2010, with Will selling their parents' house to fund a mysterious pet project, which understandably drives a final wedge between him and Jack, who departs for travels overseas. Meanwhile, their mutual friend, Paul Serene, has used his accumulated wealth to found Monarch Solutions, a huge corporation focused on advancing physics research. Physics research, you say? Precisely what type of physics research is implied by the yellow Monarch logo, likely a nod to the so-called butterfly effect. The game begins in 2016, where, for old time's sake and to honor Will's work as a consultant on the project, Jack's been invited by Paul to a trial run of a Monarch-funded time machine constructed at the local university in the fictional city of Riverport, Massachusetts. Predictably, things go off the rails pretty much from the get-go, with Will turning up mid-test in a frantic bid to shut the experiment down, and Paul and Jack subsequently getting blasted with a massive dose of chronon radiation. Conveniently, this doesn't kill them, but instead imbues them both with unique time-based abilities. What becomes apparent almost immediately, however, is that the disaster was not precisely unforeseen by Paul, who has witnessed the literal end of time. A stark future where history itself comes crashing to a halt and civilization can no longer function, frozen as it is in shattered, repeating moments called stutters. Barely surviving, he traveled back to 1999 to create Monarch and began work on something dubbed the Lifeboat Protocol, a way to shield a select few from the glitching of the time stream long enough to perhaps find a way to reverse its effects. In short, Paul's known this day was coming for years now and has marshaled all of his not inconsiderable resources for it, whilst Jack had no clue of the mess he was about to be hurled into and must survive purely by winging it. It is this asymmetric conflict that drives the remaining narrative of Quantum Break. Within moments of the catastrophe, Monarch soldiers swarm the university, seeking to apprehend Will and Jack, whilst other operatives extract the time machine core and helicopter it away to Monarch HQ. And before the brothers can escape the grounds, the story's MacGuffin is introduced, the Chronon Field Regulator, or CFR for short. This football-sized device forms the beating heart of all of Monarch's time travel technology, and without it the Lifeboat Protocol doesn't stand a chance. I'm sure it'll come as no surprise, then, that this is precisely the same item that Will argues is the only viable countermeasure to stop the end of time from occurring in the first place. You'll spend the rest of the game trying to intercept the CFR at various points in its history, and in so doing, learn where it came from in the first place. In fact, the time travel structure of Quantum Break shows excellent attention to detail and never seems to run afoul of the usual unresolved paradoxes and slipshod temporal shenanigans that we typically witness when writers mine this rich vein of science fiction. All of the time journeys in this game are self-consistent closed loops, and I won't spoil the fun for you of discovering how everything plays out, but suffice it to say that you can trace the individual timeline of any person, creature, or object in Quantum Break from start to finish without ever hitting that seemingly inevitable moment of, wait a minute, that doesn't make any sense. Moreover, the game's strict adherence to established rules gives the consequences of certain key actions far more impact than they might otherwise possess. For example, at several points in the story, principal characters attempt to alter history only to cause the very events they sought to avert, including at one point the death of the Joyce brothers' parents. This is very satisfying and shows that the team at Remedy was really paying attention. There's also a fair amount of character development for supporting characters like Beth Wilder, the Monarch double agent who has literally dedicated her entire life to helping Will prevent this catastrophe. In a particularly poignant sequence, we discover that she was set on this very path as a girl, and no prizes for guessing who gave her that particular call to quest. It's also nice to see the contrast between Paul and Jack's perceptions of what constitute viable courses of action. Paul, having known for 17 years the future that lay before him, proceeds with a methodical plan to deal with events. Jack, new to the whole time travel gig, is repeatedly tempted to try approaches that, in retrospect of course, would never have worked. He does grow more savvy over the course of the story, however, and there's a fitting scene towards the end where we witness him make a painful decision not to use the time manipulation powers when he'd most wished to. Quantum Break features exceptionally crisp graphics and high-quality textures throughout, with superb detail on all of the main characters' faces. Also, the team's extensive use of motion capture means there aren't any janky-looking NPC facial animations or unconvincing bodily movements that would break immersion and pull you out of the game. Moreover, the game has a truly unique look thanks to Remedy's in-house Northlight engine, which better depicts frozen moments of broken time and time stutters and the many ping-pong loops of environmental destruction that the player must successfully navigate. Whilst the sheer number of particle and shader effects can occasionally cause the player's visual field to appear cluttered, they are in keeping with the feel of things falling apart as one approaches the end of time. My only real quibble with the levels is that many of the urban environments do look rather samey. In fact, even when you venture into the Monarch facility itself, you'd have a hard time telling one lab or office block from another. Nonetheless, there are a few standout locations for specific set pieces in the game, including this magnificent bridge crossing sequence, which fortunately do break up the environmental monotony. Another unique aspect of Quantum Break is that it was released in tandem with 4 half-hour live-action television segments. Well, okay, technically 8, but I'll get to that in a moment. And these fill in the blanks with background developments that occur off-camera during the game itself. The production values here really are top-notch. Well, okay, apart from some occasionally ropey CGI. And these tie-ins, whilst not necessary to understand the game's plot, certainly do enhance your appreciation of the personal backgrounds and motivations of the minor NPCs, who otherwise don't feature very prominently in the game itself. Speaking of roles, Aidan Gillen, here portraying Paul Serene, but better known as Littlefinger from Game of Thrones, isn't the only familiar face in this cast. Jack Joyce is played by Shawn Ashmore, yes, Iceman from the X-Men films, and his older brother William is acted by Dominic Monaghan, who many will recognize as Charlie from Lost or Merry from the Lord of the Rings films. The science fiction cred is boosted even further by the inclusion of Lance Reddick, whom you might remember as Philip Broyles from Fringe, as the sinister CEO of Monarch Solutions. And rounding out the key supporting roles, Beth Wilder is played by Courtney Hope, aka Sally Spectra from The Bold and the Beautiful. While we're on the subject of the acting, though, it's worth mentioning that the voice direction in Quantum Break is spot on. None of the dialogue, nor indeed the occasional monologue, feels forced or stilted in any way. Conversations between characters have a realistic feel and flow quite naturally. And for a science fiction game, there's mercifully little technobabble to wade through.
If what you said is true, then how did I save you? I saw you die, Will.
Think, Jack. You never physically saw me die, did you?
I watched a roof collapse on top of you.
Creating the illusion of my death, yes. Which brought you here to make sure it remained only an illusion. It's all a loop. If time is an egg,
No egg metaphors.
Moving on to the other audio elements, Quantum Break's soundtrack was composed by Petri Alanko, again of Alan Wake fame, who leveraged the popular Reactor modular audio software suite in its production. At no point do either principal or ambient themes become overpowering, and I felt the music did a good job of enhancing both ends of the narrative spectrum. The frenetic combat sequences and traversal of chaotic, stuttering environments, as well as those more contemplative moments spent chatting with NPCs to uncover hints about everyone's past.
Frozen Crash was a mess.
Somehow, I had to find my way across, hope for the best.
Beyond just the music, various alterations to the fundamental nature of otherwise familiar sounds successfully convey the difference between normal, frozen, and stuttering temporal sequences. This, of course, includes obvious tricks like downshifting pitch and tempo as the player moves into a stutter, but also more subtle things like adding an ominous, murky undercurrent to SFX and musical cues when time is broken.
I kept heading downwards, towards the cargo ship. The route down wasn't exactly user-friendly.
And I may be fooling myself, but I also think that I may have caught variants of themes where the composition switched from a major to a minor key when time was out of joint.
The fracture was getting much worse. Timelines getting scrambled. Caught in violent loops, off sync. Crashing into each other. This was what the end of time would look like. Everything was broken. In chaos. Frozen. And no one would know.
So whilst Quantum Break isn't the sort of game that will have you hunting for a copy of the original soundtrack recording, the audio does have a high quality feel across the board. Looking at gameplay, Quantum Break is at its core a typical third-person shooter interspersed with occasional platform elements, but one made sufficiently unique by the inclusion of the various time manipulation powers enjoyed by both playable characters. And yes, I did say characters plural because you occasionally get to play a scene as Paul. The most essential of these is an obligatory rewind feature inspired by games like Braid, Life is Strange, and Prince of Persia: Sands of Time. Without this, there'd be no getting past many of the key obstacles strewn in the protagonist's path. Another built-in power that is always available is a sort of time radar with which you can track down temporal aberrations in your immediate vicinity. Such points manifest in-game as fuzzy little patches of glowing light, and by collecting these minor joist particles, you're able to boost the strength and utility of your various time manipulation powers in the upgrades menu. Beyond these always available features, Jack is also able to deploy a variety of discretionary abilities that temporarily drain his minor joist field, thus preventing their overuse. During exploration of each pathfinding area, the most valuable of these is probably Time Stop. Remember, a key element of this game is the sporadic time stutter in which anyone not granted innate time manipulation powers, like Paul and Jack, or wearing specialist temporal protection gear, like the Monarch Stormtroopers, is frozen in place or jerked back and forth in time. Therefore, the time stop power is absolutely essential for the player to freeze dangerous loops of destruction so Jack can traverse them safely. Whereas in combat, I'd say the most useful power is certainly Time Rush. This lets our hero near instantly relocate to a more advantageous position, and often right behind a Monarch soldier wearing armor whose only real weakness is a power harness on their back. You'll also need this simply to zip between one area of cover and the next, as the game AI is smart enough to recognize when players are hiding in one place for too long, and will actively maneuver enemy forces to drive you out into the open again. Speaking of the fight sequences, the shooter aspect of Quantum Break is far from its main focus, so don't go into the game expecting a lovingly rendered arsenal of military and exotic weaponry. Semi-realistically, you can only carry at most 3 weapons at a time, one from each specific category, these being primary, secondary, and heavy. Playing the game at its default difficulty level, I found ammunition drops to be fairly frequent across most levels, and I never had to resort to rationing my ammo at any point. Besides, if you do run out of bullets in your favorite gun, you can just grab one of your fallen enemy's weapons and keep on keeping on. As should be evident from the need to lead players through a very specific time travel-based narrative, Quantum Break doesn't actually support open-world exploration, and so progression through its levels does feel very much on rails. Now, while the player is offered 4 binary junction points during the game, which yield a total of 8 different cutscenes, these have no real impact upon how the overall story plays out, and generally they only decide whether minor NPCs will live or die. That said, I did find Quantum Break very enjoyable to play, with just about the right level of challenge at its default difficulty setting. Some of the enemies you'll face do require special strategies to defeat, but even when a mini-boss fight proved longer than I'd hoped, it generally still felt fair. On balance, I feel Quantum Break has a unique atmosphere and a story that's worth following through to the end. Though, frankly, I could have done without the final boss fight, which is legit brutal. Anyway, the casting's great, and the character is interesting and well-defined. The visuals are certainly rock solid for a 3-year-old game. The sound design doesn't disappoint, and the voice acting is typically engaging. Sure, the shooter elements are a bit by the book, but I felt entirely compensated by how incredibly fun the time control powers were to use. And what kind of game review would this be without some highly subjective scores? So here's how Quantum Break stacks up on my patented D20-based rating system. And for those unfamiliar with tabletop RP, a 20 is a critical success, whilst a 1 is an epic fail. So whether you agree with my scores, disagree with them, or find yourself trapped in a time loop from which you cannot escape, leave me a comment and I'll try to get back to you. And that's my review. So if you found this useful or entertaining, preferably both, please do give this video a like and perhaps offer some feedback in the comments section. Be nice, so I can make my next one even better. And if you're not already a subscriber, by all means do click on that big red button at lower right, not the one for launching the missiles, the other button, the one that says subscribe. Lastly, if you'd like to help support my channel, I've listed some options here with links down in the description. All contributions are greatly appreciated. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll hope to catch you soon in another video. Take care!